But today we're continuing and finishing up our sermon series titled Servanthood, Descending into Greatness. Now, this sermon series has been some of these words that Jesus says. He says things like, the last will be first, or the servant will be the greatest. He repeatedly says these words as he finishes up his sayings. And if you've been around the church for a bit, you probably have heard these words, but we're diving into what do they mean? Like, how is the last first? And how is the servant greatest of all? And as we think about that mindset, like we know we're supposed to be like servants for Jesus, but like, what does that look like when you like go to work, right? Like, how does that work like in your marriage? And so we're talking about aspects like this. And one of the biggest barriers we have in relation to understanding this concept is simply, how do we view God? How do we view God? God is the creator of all. Like, and a lot of us can buy that he dotted the stars in the sky, like he created the planets, like he formed this earth, like we get there. But then what happens after that? That is really the question. After the creator, sustainer, the divine entity, what is he really? God. You see, what God did is that in the midst of being the creator, he then said, I'm going to look down upon creation and I'm going to show them how to live life. And so God sent his son Jesus here to this earth, fully human, fully man, walking here on this earth and being present here for about 33 years. And with Jesus' presence then, was he was here, it then led us to something that God wasn't just the divine sustainer of all things forever and ever, but God actually showed up. And in God showing up, it taught us a lot of different things. But then it leads us to one certain reality I want to talk about today, and this is that reality. Jesus perfected being human. It's an interesting statement. That when Jesus was here on earth fully as God, that what we contend as Christians is that he perfected, that he did it with no problems, no errors, that he did it perfectly. Do you buy that? It's a hard thing at times for us to wrestle with. And we wrestle with it in a number of different ways. And really probably the most prominent way that we wrestle with this is that we think we know better than Jesus, and yet Jesus perfected humanity. One scripture, and there's a number of scriptures that teach this, but one scripture says this. It says, for we do not have a high priest, insert Jesus, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, and yet did not sin. So we have a high priest. We have a Jesus. We have a God on earth who was tempted in every single way that we were. That's hard to fathom, isn't it? Like that temptation for greed, that temptation for lust, that temptation to get more than we have, that temptation to gossip. He was tempted in every single way, and yet he did not sin. There was no error. And with this, when we buy this, when we swallow this and take it in, it leads us to something. It leads us to contend that we can actually trust and find faith in the words that Jesus says. That they're not just words that are like good wisdom, that we kind of like take what we like and throw the rest away, but we actually look at his words and say, Jesus may know better than me how to be human, how to do this journey well. That Jesus might actually be able to teach and lead me in the midst of my wrestling, because we wrestle with, all humans do, with thinking we know better. But maybe I can actually trust his words. And if we can trust his words, then when he says things, they have profound impact on us. And as I think about this reality, it kind of leads me to a certain mindset. And so I want to show you today a profound thing. It's an acorn. Here's an acorn. It's not that profound, but it really is when you stop and think about the potential of this acorn, right? So if we take this acorn and we put it down into the ground and put enough water in it, it has nutrients and all of that, this will become a beautiful oak tree. My neighbor has one down the street, and it's probably like 60, 70 feet high in the air. It has this beautiful canopy, these long limbs. I mean, it is a glorious tree. And it all started one day when somebody put an acorn in the ground, And it had the right soil and the right sun and the right ingredients and the right water, and it blossomed. That this acorn has beautiful potential. And much like this acorn, we as humans have tremendous potential. Now, when I say potential, oftentimes we go into that mindset of like sports, right? Like, don't think about that. Don't think about like your potential of like earning income or like the size of your house or how great your car is. It's not about that. God has potential for us, and we are favored. We are favored amongst all the creation. And the potential that God cares about is who we are on the inside. That's what God's after. He's after who we are in the inside. And we have tremendous potential. And so when Jesus says words like be a servant, and if we buy those words and we trust them, it's leading us to our potential. The potential that we can be servants for the world on behalf of Jesus. And when we do that, we can become the first, the greatest, as Jesus calls us to. And so when we look at a passage like John 13, and we begin to dive into these words, they're really just fascinating words. Because, let me set up the story. As Isaac read for us really, really well, the setup for the story is just as important as the story itself, right? So the night before he died, so Jesus knows he's going to the cross. Like, he knows it's coming and it's really going to hurt. He was fully God but fully human. He felt everything. And so he knows where he's going. He's at the Passover meal with his disciples, his good friends in the upper room around the table. And as they're in this upper room, they're celebrating this meal. Jesus does something that's just simply profound. He takes off his outer garment. He then wraps a towel around him. He's not naked. Don't think about that. Just a towel around him. He's fine, right? He takes it. He gets down on his feet, and he washes his disciples' feet. Now, these are not 21st century feet, right? You all have great feet, 21st century, right? These are first century sandal-wearing, we bathe occasionally feet. These are the feet that he's washing. And so Jesus, God on earth, descends down into this servant's role, and he goes from disciple to disciple, washing their feet. Now, this is a normal thing that happened. Servants did this with special meals. It wasn't uncommon, but Jesus, God, took on that role. And it's a profound thing for us to stop and to take in. When in the midst of the story, this is what he says to us. He says, "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet." So Jesus is very directly telling his disciples, and then us 2,000 years later, that we are to be feet washers. Now, that doesn't mean like we all wash our feet here on Sunday morning and do that. That's not, it's a metaphor for how we should be servants to the world. And it's truly a beautiful, profound thing that Jesus talked the talk. He talked about being a servant. He talked about being last. He did this time and time and time again. And then he demonstrated that for us by getting down and washing people's feet. Now, the profound nature of this, oftentimes we overlook because we think like this is a story that Jesus did and like it's good, okay, but like he didn't have to. Like he didn't have to, right? Like he could have been sitting at the throne at Rome, where Caesar was, and conquering the entire world. Like he could have been on the cliffs overlooking the Mediterranean in Greece with his feet up, sipping a drink, right? He could have been on the top of a mountainside in Colorado. That wasn't Colorado on that day, but in Colorado, right? Taking in the views and commanding people to do whatever he wanted them to do. He could have been hanging out wherever he wanted, doing whatever he wanted, because he's God, right? He's dotting the stars. And what did he choose to do? He chose to take the role of a servant, to descend, to wash people's feet. And he's doing it in the Middle East, which in that time was like middle of nowhere. And he's doing this not only to demonstrate for us how to be a servant, but he's doing it because it's a character of God. God is love. It's who God is. And so God is a natural servant to the world. And for us as his creation, he wants us to live as a servant as well. Richard Foster, a great writer, he writes this. He says, "We must see the difference between choosing to serve, an activity, and choosing to be a servant, a lifestyle. When we choose to serve, we are still in charge. When we choose to be a servant, we give up the right to be in charge, and we become available and vulnerable." You see, there's nothing wrong with servanthood, like doing activities. There's nothing wrong with serving, right? Like going to a food cupboard and helping out, that's a great thing. It's needed. Like helping out with sporting events for a local high school, it's fantastic. Like baking cookies for your neighbor, like do that. Like bringing cookies to your pastor, like great. All those things. Servants is good. Like doing that. Good stuff, right? But we can't stop there. We take a step forward, that God is leading us not just to do these activities, but to live a life of being a servant. And when we do that, we become, as Foster contends, both available and vulnerable. We let go of control. Because when you're just serving, right, you can just do it or not do it, like you're in control. But when you live a life of being a servant, you let go and you do two things. You're available. And what does that mean? It means you're actually with people. We do a really good job of objectifying people in our world today, right? We look at them like objects that we can get things from. We do that in commerce, we do that in business, we do that with people around us. It's part of our consumer culture. What can I get from you? And Jesus rejects that. He says, be a servant and be available, show up. And then as you show up, truly, you become vulnerable. Now, vulnerable is looked at like a bad thing, but vulnerable is just being real. It's just being who you are with other people. And servants do that. When I think about this analogy, I think about our summer lunch program. So our church, combined with other churches in Avon, we go and we serve lunches to kids who have struggles and needs, food needs, in the summer. And so we provide lunches for a week. And when we do that, all the churches have talked about this, we do it in a certain way. That we don't just take food and shove it in their face and say, here, go eat, right? That's never good. But we don't just give it to them and say, go eat. What we do is we give them food and then we eat with them. We sit down and we get to know them. We spend time with them. We play games with them. I get to play dodgeball, which is great. We have fun and we spend time with them one-on-one and in groups because they are valued and we are striving to live like a servant. Another great ministry is Habitat for Humanity, right? And this is an organization that helps people get homes. And so when you sign up for Habitat for Humanity, you don't just fill out paperwork and get a house. You fill out paperwork and then you have to work for it. And you work for it by working on your actual house. And so one component when you serve with Habitat for Humanity, you sign up to serve it and you're working alongside of the homeowner. And so it's not just serving somebody who needs a house, but you're there with them. You're spending time with them. You get to know them, that you're both available and vulnerable. And these kinds of activities are what God is after in us, that when we become a servant, we descend to connect fully with somebody. As we think about this, that we are called to be feet washers, it's not just for us to go and do activities, right? It's to engage a lifestyle of being a servant. To take it into your home, of how you can care and serve your spouse, your kids, your parents, your uncles and aunts, how you can be a servant to them fully. It's to take it into your work, how you can do your job, but how you also can do it with the ethic of serving the community and serving the people you are with. It's being feet washers in our neighborhoods, in our communities, of showing up for the person down the street, being present with them, that we are called to take this and to wash people's feet wherever we go. This last Sunday, after we finished this service, I had a great example of this. So I was in the gathering area chatting away with somebody, and a member of our church came up and said, "Pastor, I need a screwdriver. Do you know what a screwdriver is?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." But I was curious. I'm like, "Why do you want a screwdriver? What's going on?" And so I asked him, I said, "What's going on?" He was telling me that one of the toilets down this way wasn't working, it was running, and he was trying to fix it. So I got him a screwdriver, and I walked with him. And there were a group of 5 people who were there. They're outside this bathroom, and they're working together to try to fix this problem. And I looked at them and I just said, you just preached my sermon next week. Because they showed up, right? Like, you finish church, like, you go out to eat, you go to the grocery store, like, you have plans, right? And this group of 5 stopped, saw a need, did what they could to fix the need, and were servants. These are the kind of activities that God is after in us, to live a life like this. And so today is Consecration Sunday. It's a day in the life of our church when what we do is we fill out the documents, and it might be mundane just to make a few check marks, but the check marks are important because they're talking about our commitment to God. That our culture and our world has all sorts of different directions that we could head. But as Christians, we are saying we are committing our lives to God. And when we write it down, like we're going to show up and worship. We're going to read our Bible. We're going to actively serve our neighbor. That we are going to serve our church. That we're going to give financially. When we make that commitment, we're making a commitment to God. And it does something to us. Because we're in a culture where we don't really commit to a whole lot. But it tells us something that we are going to do our best to align our lives with God. And in the midst of doing that, it rearranges our soul. It shifts us in the midst of those tension, right, of thinking we know better, to saying, God, you have perfected humanity. You have perfected what it means to be human. In the midst of doing that, I trust in you, and I'm going to take that step to be your servant, to be your person, to take on that identity the best that I can, so that I can be committed to you, Almighty, and all that you have done. And so as we prepare for this moment, what's going to happen in a second is we're going to stand and we're going to sing a hymn. I'm going to take this basket over here, put it right in the middle, and I'm going to invite you to come forward, to place your consecration documents into the basket as a way to commit, to come before God, to come before the cross, to commit to God. Now, if you filled it out online or if you don't have it, don't worry about it. But this is a way that we can just say, God, I have gifts and abilities, and I'm committing these to you for the next year. Be with me in the midst of that journey. And so as we prepare for Consecration Sunday, I have a litany that I'd like us to share in together. And so I'll be the leader, and you can be the people, and we can go ahead and share in this. We dedicate our gifts to you, O God. Help us to use them to glorify you, to be vessels of your work in this world. We dedicate our pledges to you, O God. Guide these resources to be a blessing to our community and beyond. Use us, O God, to do your work in this world. May we bless the brokenhearted, lift up the struggling, and share your good news for all to know. Amen.